Thank you for that very warm introduction. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. All the opinions expressed here are my own personal views. All the data you'll see here are from publicly available sources or reports. Anyone who's ever tried to make a corporate presentation understands how legal departments can get in the way of discussion. If you have a question that you think involves something regarding Wells Fargo specifically, there are some technical people here in the conference you might be able to ask that of.
We'll assist them with those things. You don't need to worry about it.
Okay, good, wonderful. All right, street cred, real quick. How can I help you? I have 25 years of experience in financial services. Prior to that, I actually, and in addition to that, I have 17 years in tech and data consulting. Basically, I've worked in insurance companies. I've worked in asset management companies. I've worked in brokerage companies. I've worked in banks. I've worked in fintech. So that's the full range of financial services. In addition, I've been a consultant in Silicon Valley, and you can imagine how diverse that is. So what I'd like to do today is basically three things. Number one, draw attention to the big mega trends that you may be hearing here in the conference. By the way, I did not coordinate any of this material with the other Teradata speakers or the company. It's very interesting how much of this overlaps, but there are some differences. Number two, I'd like to basically point out, draw attention to key successes that a particularly large company that I used to work with has. And number three, maybe help you start your own, developing your own agenda for how you might look at AI going forward. What's important here is this is a different view from some of the other views you've already heard about. It's a longer term view. And at the same time, we put it in the perspective of how a very large company is dealing with those long-term issues. So how does our story begin? In a universe far, far away, in a galaxy powered by technology, billions of AI agents are seamlessly integrating devices, virtual assistants, enterprise software, creating a vast network of connected superintelligence. There are billions of AI robots operating across industries like manufacturing, healthcare, education, logistics, becoming essential to basic human life. My key point today is the future was yesterday. How many of you remember that ChatGPT moment discussion from some of our earlier discussions? And how many of you have actually played with ChatGPT? Right? Did you get a little feeling of chills there that that AI was more intelligent? I teach data science to high school kids during the summer, not kids that don't have the opportunity. And what I show them to help them get their aha moment is I show them the 2016 video of AlphaGo beating the champion, and then also other videos associated with that. And so there are these aha moments that we feel as we come to that boundary. Now you say we're effectively at the beginning of a fifth industrial revolution, and you're going to ask me, okay, what happened to the fourth one? What the fourth one looks like is a revolution focused on automation and connectivity. One that uses IoT, you've heard this, AI, robotics, big data, cloud computing. These are all the terms that we're all familiar with, and you've seen the products being rolled out to meet these on a current basis. The applications are smart factories, smart homes, digital transformations. The types of data they're dealing with are the relational databases, NoSQL and NoSQL, graph, document, time series, columnar, in-memory, all these things. If you're a data person, you get that's home base. That's what you're currently dealing with now. You say, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is in 10 years, AI will be everywhere. You know, we'll have cities powered by AI that basically auto-detect you. I remember standing at a lamppost recently and hitting a button. If there's so many cameras, why doesn't it know that I'm there? Why doesn't it interact? Because it's not programmed to do that. See, that's a matter of thinking. The thought process is not there yet. It's coming. The mechanics are there. The data layers are there. You know, sustainable energy. I was having a conversation with somebody who works with the oil and gas industry, and he says, you won't believe how much they're spending on documenting, you know, the return on energy, not ROE, that way, return on equity, but return on energy and the sustainability. You know, another one that we've seen, and you'll see in some of the slides, like these, some of these are auto-generated by Grok on Twitter, and you know, if you've ever generated a presentation, obviously it's an easy thing to do. But you know, human AI collaboration. You know, instead of, you know, return on capital, return on collaboration. All of a sudden, I'm talking about totally different metrics. You know, not the ones that your CEO or your manager saying, hey, get me a dashboard with RO return on collaboration for, you know, or return on energy. So what is Industry 5.0? It's basically bringing the human back into the equation. I know, that sounds radical, doesn't it? Come to a tech conference and talk about why tech doesn't matter, you know, and what really matters is the human interaction, that how technology serves the human being. You know, we were talking, we were listening to Microsoft earlier talking about, you know what, we're not going to do any projects unless it really serves a human need. They called it a return on investment, but what they're basically saying, if this thing doesn't meet the requirements of being accurate and relevant, forget about it. You know, it's not serving us from that perspective. So that's what the fifth industrial revolution is about. Some of you may have heard the concept human in the loop, which is basically an algorithmic concept, right? But basically putting people back into the equation. What else does the fifth industrial revolution look like? It's an emerging revolution. Quite honestly, I had trouble with this. I knew there was something going on, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So what I said is, AI, help me. Put a word cloud for all this research that I've done and tell me what are the key words, what are the key aspects that I should be focusing on? You know, guess what came up? Human AI. You know, ethics, collaboration, sustainability. And then I looked at it from the industry perspective, right? You know, I looked for finance. It's down there somewhere. See it in very small print. Healthcare is obviously a much larger beneficiary. You know, key innovations are going to be ethical AI, human AI collaboration, again, all the things we talked about, and highly personalized medicine, highly personalized everything. You know, now, what's critical here, again, this is a database conference, and I actually went through what are all the different database types, and data types and databases, and you know, vendors. I went through a whole research on that. And I said, at the end of the day, what's happening is this is new data. This isn't your old Buick. You know, this isn't your, you know, remember the cars where you could actually, you know, fix the spark plugs and do all that? You know, this is not like that, you know. This is very, you know, I cannot tell you how happy I was to hear, again, I did not talk to the Teradata team about Vector being a new database type, a new focus for the company. I said, good, they're getting it, they get it. They see it too, you know. Multi-model databases, AI optimized databases, you know. Enhanced graph, for those of you who are techies, there's the regular knowledge graph, and then there's enhanced graph, and, you know, more real-time databases, which are small databases, actually, you know, at the edge. Decentralized, quantum, we've all heard that, and one of my personal favorites, blockchain. So that's the cool stuff, and that's about AI. Data democratization was a hard concept for me to get my understanding of, and, you know, I looked at this so many different ways. Most recently, Harvard Business Review, there's a data science review, did a whole series on data democratization. I had a whole list of, if we connect later, I can give you a bibliography of things that talk about that. So basically, it's about data for the common good. You say, wait a minute, I'm still worried about my permissions in the IAM at the GCP, and did I set the right roles and the right groups? I said, good, that's good. Yeah, do that. That's important. Okay, but fundamentally, the nature of the data, is this data, private data, or is it public data that can be brought in and used for the common good? Some of it is and some of it isn't, right? And that's that. And there'll be challenges there that vendors, and including partners, will have to meet. So in 10 years, human AI will be in medicine, education, and finance, right? We talked about personalized medicine, symbiodocs, synthetic doctors, AI in education, which means customized learning paths, and AI in finance, the era of abundance. So what does a company do to prepare for Industry 5.0? So what I did here is I looked at, it's the same thing. Let's put it this way. You too can do this. Take your company and look at the public reports about the AI activities that it reports on. Okay? You'll be surprised at how much there is out there, in aggregate about your company. Now, granted, this is a large company. Annual revenues of $83 billion, assets of $1.9 trillion. You talk about transaction volume, 10 billion debit card transactions. I didn't even talk about the credit card transactions. 242,000 employees. Now, I'm going to, everybody has an opinion. My opinion is when you do a survey of the managers, maybe a third of them won't know what's happening at the company, and they might say we're not aligned. Because in a company that large, how can everyone know everything? That's an impossibility, right? 4,000 branches and another equally larger number of ATMs, and the company is in 24 of the 30 largest markets. So what you're going to hear about is a strategy that, I don't know if remember the Yelp reviews. It has $1 for low budget, $2 for, affordable, $3 for, a little pricey, and $4 for very expensive. This is the $4 plus budget. Okay, this is very, very big business. So let's get through the 7 major themes. We talked about bringing the human back into the equation. So fostering collaboration between AI and the human. Who's the human? In this case, it's the customer. If you go to the company website, you're going to see a branch locator. What's the purpose of the branch locator? Get humans from digital space into appointments with the right parties, into the right branches, into the right services, right? So, in addition to that, we generate for customers a whole series of customized offers. There are multiple programs. I use here 3 action steps: invest in AI augmented tools, upskill employees, invest in AI human collaboration platforms. These are the supporting mechanisms. There are 22 of these supporting factors in here, by the way, that support the 7 themes. And you can look at this in more detail later. The second one has to do with sustainability. Again, that was the big topic. What does it mean to be sustainable? Energy is the limiting factor going forward, not capital. I wonder what the Marxists would think about that in terms of factor of production. But anyway, Wells Fargo has a stated goal of financing $500 billion for sustainable programs by 2030. If you had said that to me before I did this research, I wouldn't have believed you. How could it be? I know we do a little investment banking on the side, as I said. A little investment banking on the side is $178 billion of sustainable programs. Okay? Also, something that I had no idea about, despite all the consumer research that I've done, just because we don't touch that auto data. Okay? Wells Fargo finances 1 in 6 EV loans in the USA. Did you know that? That's incredible. That's huge. You know. So sustainability is a very important consideration. You know, when I talked about the ethics, you know, there's a lot of commentary about how ethics doesn't pay, you know, why is it really important? We know it is, you know. When I looked at how much the Wells Fargo spent on fines since the year 2000, guess what number I came up with? Any estimates? Any estimates? $27 billion. Any guesses for how much Citi paid in fines? $27 billion. How about JP Morgan? Anybody? $40 billion. This is an auction here. And again, I'm only using public facts. Okay, this is, you know, my own personal opinion. I'm not saying these are bad people. I'm just saying this is the cost of not being ethical. How much did B of A pay since that time? $87 billion. I'm only talking about 4 banks, right? Anybody that tells me an ethically focused product doesn't have a market doesn't know how to add. Because that's hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's just in one industry. Focus on personalization and customer-centric AI. You know, Wells Fargo example of this is the chatbot. I know we call ours Fargo. Bank of America calls theirs Erica. I don't know what other bank names there are if you all have chatbots with names. You know, personalizing them. Okay. What I think is special about this one, obviously this is based on public knowledge. It's based on the GCP platform using Dialogflow. And there's also a Spanish version of this. And it happens that 18% of the US market is Spanish. And I bet, I'm not going to give the exact number, that the participation of customer segment for that Spanish-speaking segment is probably less than 18% at the bank. Probably in many other banks as well. So here's a way to use AI to capture a market that you've been actually just kind of ignoring or not able to attract in the past. And that's just using the language. So the expectation is that the Fargo application will handle up to 100 million interactions per year. It's still in its infancy, but it will be a very powerful thing. Next key concept is adopt a human-centric design approach. You see these visuals here? There are no buildings with columns on them. You know, remember the old financial industry icons? You know, here's a big cement building with the pillars and the, you know, none of those. You know, these are people in typical slice of life marketing. As a matter of fact, this is also an indicator of how the company is using customer content to get the goals into the system and work with customers on their needs, instead of just saying, I think you meet this segment profile, you must have this need for this. You know, that kind of interaction that we heard about from the sports team where they the customer tells about, you know, I have this family member, his birthday's on such and such, I want to buy tickets for him, that kind of thing. So, you know, that kind of personalization going forward. Invest in advanced data infrastructure. This is a no-brainer, and this is why we're here, you know, to understand what are the new technologies, you know, how does cybersecurity fit into this, you know. One of the beautiful things to hear is how vendors, especially Teradata, is doing what they need to do to protect our security. You know, that's top. I remember going to technology conferences where you're dealing with people in the tech world, and it's always faster, better, and cheaper. And I said, that's nice, but when you come to a financial services company, you have to talk about risk management, you know, risk mitigation, you know, risk, you know, and then you could talk about faster, better, and cheaper, you know, from that perspective. It's difficult. There's a commentary in here about being multi-cloud, and we saw in one of the surveys that 75% of customers in that survey had a blended cloud strategy. My comment is be careful with that. Again, it works for this company. It's their formula. Again, that's the $4 plus formula. You know, it doesn't work in every scenario or every budget from that perspective. And it goes without saying, build strategic, partnerships. And in this case here, I mentioned the work that the company had done with the EV. What they had built is a whole financing pipeline to get the vendors, to be able to deploy for the EV cells. Also, something that's near and dear to my heart, since I work with the Albany State students, is the participation in student education. We have we have an AI shortage in the U.S. And we have an intelligence shortage in the U.S. as well, relative to other countries that maybe favor math and the sciences. And the only way we're going to do that is by training the next generation. And so if you hear me knocking on your door or hear me talking about that, that's one of my pet subjects, is helping students, become more proficient. And finally, this concept of, continuous innovation. For some companies, it's just a nice thing to say, okay, we're innovative here, we're innovative there. But for Wells Fargo, they actually have what's called an innovation labs. In addition to that, they do invest in AI strategy startups. This is serious. This is real money. Now, they're very focused also as well. They have a whole climate analysis department. Obviously, it goes along with the energy analysis they do. They work with the U.S. government on multiple projects. Wrapping up the framework, leverage AI to enhance human creativity, build AI systems that prioritize fairness, transparency, and inclusivity. Sustainability, optimize your processes, and create greener business models. One of the beautiful things about the illustration about the 8-fold improvement in processing time between, the Teradata process and just a Python process, that may seem like a no-brainer, but if you took that and did the math on the multiple numbers of projects that you're using Python on, and then tried to see what your costs are of running all those little, those expensive Python programs, you'll see that there's cost involved in there. So it's not just speed, there's cost as well. Advanced data structure, fostering innovation and partnerships. Okay, so what's next for businesses like yours? I'd say a couple things. There are obviously a lot of ideas here. One is branding. Leverage your partnerships and your brand for competitiveness. It's a beautiful thing. I cannot tell you how happy it made me to see the phrase, Teradata, the trusted AI company. Wonderful. Did they read my material? I don't know. No, they've already been that. Okay. But that is they're right in there. That's one of the essential needs. Integrate the AI brand across many different platforms for personalization with your partners. Okay, that's something that we do in business, not the vendors. Okay, and obviously then there's the operational efficiencies as well. And by the way, that has to do with a specific card that was very, very successful, a recent card launch. Goes without saying, and this is really not a detailed enough slide for DBAs or people that manage infrastructure, but for us analysts and people looking at it from a larger system perspective, is think of the cost involved when you're making those decisions. When you go on to the different marketplaces and you pick your spot instances. Do you really need 16 core when 2 will do? The ego is, I want to run the big fast machine with the GPUs, okay? As long as somebody else is paying for it, that feels okay, But what if you were paying the bill, Think about it that way, Obviously, auto-scaling, right-sizing computer resources, tracking, monitoring costs, that's something they teach everyone that works with the cloud. And again, efficiency in modeling. For those of you that are model geeks, You've heard of quantization, you've heard of precision training, you've heard of, there are all kinds of RAG techniques that we could talk about offline here, back and forth that might be interesting. Leverage the open source tools. I cannot tell you how happy I am to see leveraging of the AI modeling pipeline work. Wow, that's wonderful. Knime, right? Consider hybrid solutions, which mean prem and off-prem. Again, right size the workload for what you're doing, okay? And manage for change. Now, what could go wrong? Is cloud AI dominance inevitable? I did, in fairness, ask the AI to give me a data center in space. That sure does look like a Death Star, doesn't it? Anybody been in a server room? It's really cool in there, isn't it? I mean, I've built server rooms, and it does not like human beings walking around body temperature, heating up their environment. They want it nice and, there's all kinds of heat being generated in there, so space would be an ideal place for this, right? So disruption is coming to these AI factories, whether they're in space or whether they're in the big three. Now, I'm taking some artistic license here. You'll see the parallels to the Star Wars analogies, the rise of the rebel networks, right? Networks built on not just the main systems, but, specialized towards specific applications. There's one that I saw the other day. It has to do with imaging of internal organs, a monad, I think, a monai or something like that. Visualization, creating synthetic models for doctors to be able to see, to better understand what's going on. And networks, specialized for that. The fall of the big three. Again, please, apologies to my friends at AWS, Google, and Microsoft. The larger you are, the larger a target you are, from that perspective. They are obviously doing everything they can on their end, so they don't have a Death Star moment, and find themselves obliterated, at a disadvantage. In the meantime, data centers will independently continue to grow in the outer rim, in the outer edges. Maybe these are, you can call them prem or hybrid prem or connected prem, internal, where you create your own mini cloud in a global company. It has nothing to do with the big three. All these things are happening, right? There are a couple of vendors. I'm a former stock analyst and director of research, so I'm always looking for stocks that are going to do well or not do well. So I couldn't help but pick on a couple of these data center infrastructure companies that are highly, highly valued. They're the darlings of today because they're providing the services, and I'm sure they'll probably continue for a while here. But there will come a moment when that growth will peak out, and it will be important for these vendors that are tied to the data centers to move into another position. Empowerment of the digital Jedi. We all love the Jedi. Who doesn't love the Jedi, right? These are the good guys. But there is, by definition, okay, and then we talked about training people, but there is, by definition, the dark side of that. People who take data democratization to the long way. All data should be available. Your data, my data. The code breakers, I call them. And with their own code breakers manifesto. Okay, obviously not documented in here. And then finally, specialized AI cantinas, where you go in, you get exactly what you need, and you move to the next vendor or the next place to get the other services. And it may be something like fraud detection in one area. It may be something like we already kind of have that now, but it isn't that kind of wild. It isn't wild and woolly yet, in that fashion. So, how do you deal with disruptions? Adopt a multi-cloud hybrid architecture. Stay nimble is the indirect. Okay, build redundancy, failovers. Now there is another dark side to this as well. if you have two computers, one is working and one is not, don't you have available capacity that you haven't used? You know, NVIDIA just made a huge investment in a company that actually takes that unused capacity and sells it. So it's still in its infancy, still a very small operation, but 3 years from now it'll be bigger. 5 years from now there'll be press releases about how much of that spare capacity is being used to augment some of the needs that are out there. Obviously, test and recovery plans. We could all tell stories about how we've sat there and worked through the actual execution of recovery plans. And finally, strengthen your trusted provider relationships. And thank goodness we're here at this conference to do that. So what do the leading data infrastructure providers look like? They'll be recognized as decentralized, AI-optimized, and database secure solution providers. There'll be companies with global presence. Global in the context of, we have a US dollar network and we have a WAN-based network, and those are the realities of it. So maybe we have, multiple networks in that way, multiple companies on each of those economic platforms. The platform will be a hub for AI innovation. It will be known for its commitment to privacy, security, and sustainability. I know one company at least that's doing the right thing on that. And will not just be a service provider, but a key enabler of the next generation. Making something like AI Unlimited available, I cannot tell you how powerful an initiative that is. I personally am a big believer in it. It may not hit your radar in corporate land, but that concept has a lot.
Hey, Rudy, can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
I think that slide, actually, this might be a little biased, definitely not a hallucination, but this slide should just have a big fat T in the middle of it, an orange T.
It does. It does.
Okay.
But you know what? When I put this together, since I did not read the Teradata roadmap, and I did not connect with any of the product people, I was doing that from what the customer needs and what the market demands. And
so are we.
So, yeah, exactly. That's a beautiful thing. Yes. So how not to get left behind? As I come to these conferences to figure out what do I need to learn next, what do I need to change in my attitude, what can I do different when I get back. Number one, keep learning. I personally try to dedicate 10% of my week to continuous learning. That's a lot, and I document it, and I teach other people to do the same. Those that have done that with me are very successful. Those who have fallen off, they're not so successful. Okay? So really, you have to be serious about that. You have to dedicate time to learning. Focus on creativity. That means the new stuff, not just the old stuff. Okay? Not just, let me get my work done in my 10 hours of personal development, whatever my development time is. And thinking ethically, that takes a little while, because it means different things to different people depending on what your marketplace is. In conclusion, the implications are AI is the core of database innovation. Think about your database as not just your data and your processes, not just residing in your own little container, but how they influence the broader ecosphere of customers, partners. This is what the branding does, right? For example. Strategic considerations for businesses: build, buy, and if you can't afford that, venture, or all of the above, especially in the big ticket, in the big budget portfolios. And finally, the one that we really don't like to talk about is the reinvention of business models, changing the whole servicing equation. So one final thought, for those of you that are Star Trek fans, all's well that ends well. I don't want to paint a dark picture here, of all the disruptions and all the changes, my message is apply the hero's journey from all that classic literature that we all remember to your businesses and discover your newfound strengths. Remember that commentary about maybe 20% of your knowledge all of a sudden now that has gone up. Find that extra, find that core competency, develop that, and sustain that. And with that, thank you very much. You can catch me on LinkedIn, and we're open for questions here for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Rudy. That was a lot. That was great. Thank you. I was trying to think of a great question I had around some of your recommendations, but I want to open it up to the audience first. Questions for Rudy. What did he use to generate those space age images, maybe?
If you go back to your definition of Industry 5.0, the controversial statement you made in terms of bringing human back to the loop, versus pretty much the rest of the industry is working against that, basically trying to remove human out of the loop, right? So what kind of applications do you think keeping human in the loop will be preferable versus not?
So the
Instead of
challenge-
instead of proposing that, that's either 0 or 1 type of decision, right? It's not like human will be in the loop, therefore it's a better solution, versus human will be out of the loop, that's why it's a better solution. It's not one or the other, probably it's a spectrum, and it depends on the application. That's kind of the premise of my question.
That's a very good question. My filters for that are time horizons. Just like they were talking about feasibility in the Microsoft before, is it something that I can feasibly execute in a realistic period of time, or is it going to, or is it really a whole lot of effort, not just mechanically, but in terms of getting my managers and the rest of my team on board to get that done. That's kind of it's a mindset challenge, a cultural challenge. If you don't have that issue, then you have content being created by the humans, and they're in the loop in that process. And I think it varies by industry. It varies by type of regulation involved with the data. I think it varies by data type. So much of our personal images are already part of the public repertoire, repositories. I was saying, if I'm standing on the street, you should know who I am. Well, in China, yes. Maybe that's not the case yet in the U.S. yet. But that means that with a quick scan of me, you would know not just who I am, but you would know my whole LinkedIn profile, and maybe even where I'm going next week. From that perspective. So there are some trade-offs in that process, and depending on the business and the application, you need to make that assessment. Now, another answer is I had, in my previous employment, that we used to have a scorecard for the model projects, and the scorecards included things like, data, how did it have to be updated, who needed to update the model. And there were a lot of people involved in the process, and that became indirectly part of the decision. So it's not just the people in terms of at certain control points, but how automated your total system is. Does that make sense? The definition is going to vary by project, and it should by definition. But yeah, here's another perspective. We're in these lunar eclipse days where we have the sun on one horizon and the moon on the other. So yeah, maybe the sun is our current Industry 4 and the moon is Industry 5. You can have them in the same place, but we know that there's a transition occurring. One is supported by the other. You can't have all the new data types until you can actually take the old data types and make the conversions and create the new structures. So they kind of require each other as a flow.
That's a great question. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? Can you repeat that question again? It's like, when are we bringing it back in? When the human back in? Or what kind of decision are you trying to make?
Yeah, I guess the default behavior of a technologist is to automate everything.
Sure.
Right? Whereas Industry 5.0 is challenging that in a controversial way, saying human will be in the loop, and that will be the new, better, implied as a better solution. And my question was about, that's probably a spectrum, right?
Yes.
It's not like automating everything is always the best solution, or putting human in the loop is always the best solution, right? There's a spectrum, and it depends on applications. And he mentioned about time horizon. Different factors will impact that where you want to be in that trade-off.
Right.
But if you take a step back and maybe take a really long horizon, like 100-year horizon, my bias will be that humans will be completely out of the loop. It will be 100% automated. Versus, maybe your Industry 5.0 will replace with 6.0, and the 6.0, there is no room for human.
Interesting.
So-
100 years from
so
now,
the-
it's not going to
The
matter.
common thought about, large language models, which are the basis of a lot of the intelligence that we're working with, is that they effectively come from the collective consciousness of human discussion, whether it's on the internet or the books or ideas from that perspective. So they come from us. They've been created from us, in that way. Maybe they're in a different form factor, than we would be, and maybe they'll come back to a form factor that is more like us, which is a little eerie, and the Clippy effect, takes place there. It's really the everything that I've seen puts a premium on human interaction. Imagine how much value you would put on human interaction in that process. I have, for instance, my own personal vision about, what a bank, you saw the visual there of a bank, it doesn't show, I know a certain bank that's taking, well, oops, let me say, there are specialists that create new branch banking models. And those branch banking models have ambassadors in them. And one ambassador will be a human being, Joe Banker, and the other ambassador will be an embedded AI. Maybe it's a full body or a torso, who knows what type, what brand it is, from that perspective. But that's a whole different interaction. Again, you've got the congeniality of working with a human being, but you have all the convenience of the partner next to the banker having access to all the data that they need without having to fuss around with learning 5 manuals and clicking on buttons. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a banker's office and he's clicking this computer and is he looking at me or is he hunting for the data, from that perspective. So it'll change interactions.
That was a great question. Kind of futuristic, right? 100 years from now, we might not be here. Other questions for Rudy? Looking at impact of today and or even tomorrow. I thought there was one more controversial thing that you listed up there related to our cloud providers. You want to comment on that?
Yeah. So here's what I see. All right? If there's a certain provider that provides the material that's needed for the factories, and that provider can basically create their own independent services, separate and apart from these other customers, as a separate brand or as a non-competing product elsewhere, whatever. Eventually, when the disruptions occur from the decentralization, that they'll be in a very good position to be able to basically absorb. It's a classic industry consolidation technique. Watch it, where a large company comes in and starts to consolidate a lot of small vendors and create, a larger enterprise. So I won't name names, but I think we could all imagine what they might be. This particular company that's hosting this conference is in a great position to benefit from all those partnerships with both what I call the big three, as well as the service providers, the equipment providers. So that's also, but that's a very unique role. I don't know of any other company that does that, but that's my personal impression.
Thanks for letting me poke you a little bit with that one. Everyone, join me in thanking Rudy. Appreciate your perspective.